and welcome to the Soccernomics Podcast, the home of football economics. My name is George Lyons, and every Friday I'll be joined by special guests from all areas of the footballing world, along with our own team of expert journalists from the Soccernomics website, where we'll be delving into the economical, financial, business and legal matters behind the beautiful game that we all love. If you're a fan of football and want to get to know more about what goes on behind the scenes of your club, or the impacts that football has on the economy and vice versa, continue listening and consider subscribing to us on YouTube and Spotify so you can stay up to date. If you're a football fanatic and weekly podcasts just aren't enough, head over to our website soccernomics.net where you can find more in-depth articles on all the latest topics in football economics, written by myself and our brilliant team of journalists. They really are worth a read. On this week's episode, I was joined by the brilliant Ammaar Abdul Karim, who is not only a member of the Soccernomics team, but is a member of the UN Youth and is a finance and computer science student at the University of Adelaide. Ammaar is a journalist for us at Soccernomics, specialising in the finance sector in football, and you can read all of his work on our website soccernomics.net. On the podcast, we discuss the past, present, and potential future impacts that coronavirus will have on world football, from club revenues to the impact on the transfer market, and even to the future approach to scouting and recruitment as football clubs seek to find more creative and innovative ways to compete at the highest level, while sustaining a profitable business. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and if you want to show your appreciation, please be sure to support us by clicking the like button and hitting subscribe. Also be sure to hit the bell button so you can stay up to date with all our latest podcasts. Alright, let's get into it. What's up, guys? George Lyons here, and welcome back to the Soccernomics Podcast. Today, I'm joined by the lovely Ammaar Abdul Karim. How are you, Ammaar?
How's it going?
You good, mate?
Oh, I'm loving it, man.
Loving it?
Yeah.
Lovely. Great to have you on here, mate. Great to have you on. Now, Ammaar, tell me a bit about yourself.
So currently, I'm a student at Adelaide University. I'm studying computer science with finance, so it gets a bit rough.
Another smart cookie. That's it.
Second year at the moment.
Yep.
And I guess in terms of relativity to just my finance extracurriculars, on the side I am a finance director of another non-for-profit organization.
Yep. Brilliant.
But yeah.
What does that involve?
So that organization is called UN Youth, and what they focus on is essentially just holding workshops for young students and teaching them about democracy, giving them leadership skills, most importantly, and literally just education content that we provide.
Brilliant. Love that. Ammaar is also a good friend of Ovi, who was on our podcast last week. This podcast is going to be on something very, very similar to last week in terms of its focus is on finance. In particular, what we're going to be talking about is the impacts and the aftermath impacts of what coronavirus has had on football as a whole. It's a very, very broad subject, and it's a subject that not a lot of people really have got their heads around. Like, you see it on TV, a lot of what people think is going to happen. You see a lot of TV pundits and football fans saying what's going to happen. It's not necessarily wrong, but it's not an educated guess of what it should be happening. So, for example, let's say we'll be talking about deflation in the player market, stuff like that, which is a very broad subject in itself, but why does it happen? Ammaar is very good in terms of the finance sort of sector, even though he is also doing the computer science degree. But yeah, we'll be getting into that very, very soon. So for a start, as Ammaar, coronavirus has been very interesting in football, hasn't it?
It's been a roller coaster, honestly.
Yeah.
I think there is still a lot of uncertainty about how it's, essentially just the football world in general, how it's going. And I think as time progresses, we are still learning about really the magnitude of how this is going to impact, the transfer market, broadcasters, sponsorship. So essentially just the whole umbrella, we're only starting to learn the magnitude of how this is going to play into the football world. Yeah. And really fans will actually see the difference in, okay, this is my favorite club. There's been rumors that we're going to be signing this player. Doesn't happen. And I guess that's just an implication of this unfortunate pandemic.
Yeah. It's certainly affected a lot of clubs in a bad way. To put it quite simply. for starters, everyone thought it was going to be a lot worse than what it ended up being. So, of course, it hit its peak quite quickly in Europe, didn't it? It kind of just came out of nowhere. Between like March and April, everything just skyrocketed, and all of a sudden, England, France, Spain were the worst hit places in the world, pretty much, besides the US and China.
100%. In England, I think at the moment it's been empty stadiums for a while.
Yeah, still is. Yeah,
and people essentially just don't know what the foreseeable future is. Is it still going to be empty stadiums for until 2021, or what's going on? And I think not even that's the question that still has to be answered.
Well, they sort of moved in the right direction. So Project Restart was an idea to try and get things going. Before Project Restart had happened, there was no idea of when football was going to come back. Is it going to come back? Does this mean that football clubs are just going to go into free fall and just basically go out of business, which is kind of crazy to think of. But at the time, it was a very real possibility, because if you don't play football, there's no way of making money. And all of a sudden, things like these TV rights that are ludicrous deals, especially for Premier League or the top 5 leagues in Europe, all of a sudden, all of that revenue that they would be making that year, they actually have to pay that back because they're not playing football. So things like that was something that was obviously in the pipe works, and they knew they had to do something about it. Otherwise, football across the world was going to die.
100%.
Essentially. So Project Restart was the way of getting football back in a way that was safe for the players, but also to make sure that football clubs stayed afloat. But it doesn't necessarily help every single football club, does it?
Not at all. I think one particular case would be Tottenham, and so essentially with Tottenham, and you could also look at generally, I think, the lower EFL EFL clubs that are just generally, their main revenue streams aren't as diverse as obviously the main EPL clubs.
100%.
So if we look into Tottenham, so Tottenham in the 2017-2018 season, they were having like record high, league high revenues and incomes. And then once we saw the pandemic come into play, it all started to fall apart. So with Tottenham at the moment, so basically what happened was that they weren't really in a good financial position. Just before the pandemic hit.
Oh, really?
And so you could actually see, when Mourinho came into play, they weren't really active in the transfer market. So it was in the sense that if they were to go ahead and make a transfer, it would have to be offset by selling one of the players. And we saw this with Eriksen. When Eriksen left, I think he left for 25 million.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot.
It wasn't a lot. So essentially, when they signed a new player, around that time, Eriksen left. So that was what offset essentially their transfer fees. And so also, and then now that this pandemic has come around, they had to refinance their stadium, which the new one they've got, which was I think a £1 billion project, which is absolutely absurd.
It's insane, but it's an amazing stadium.
It is an amazing stadium.
Yeah, 100%.
And so basically, what happened was that they refinanced this stadium with a loan from, I think it was a £600 million loan in order to finance it. And this loan was from, I think it was investment banks, maybe
really?
Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
Merrill Lynch, HSBC, probably. There was a few. And so I think this pandemic has definitely made it worse for a club like Tottenham. Where if you look into the loan details, it is meant to be repaid, I think by next year.
And £600 million paid by
it's just been terrible.
Man. That's not good at all. Like that.
Yeah, and that's just looking at Tottenham. If we look at Manchester United, they've had their revenue streams just crushed at the moment. Obviously,
really, what's happened?
I would say just they're the club with, I'd say, one of the highest ticket sales compared to any other EPL club.
Yeah, they've got the biggest stadium, don't they?
Had a massive toll. On the club.
100%. That's what's taken the biggest hit. Of course. What am I saying in terms of like, what's the word called again? Where you have multiple revenue streams. I forgot what that's called.
Just diversification.
That's the word. Yeah, diversification. Yeah. So fortunately for Premier League clubs and clubs across the top 5 leagues, their revenue streams are quite diverse because at the end of the day, they are a brand. They've got like we said about the TV rights deal, which actually makes up most of their revenues, but that is what's keeping them afloat. Of course, you've got TV rights deals, which is one form of revenue. The other one's match day revenue, and the other one is commercial revenue. So obviously selling shirts and that sort of stuff. Once you talk about a club like Tottenham, the position that they're in, it's not because their revenues have necessarily taken a huge hit overall because they've still got the TV rights deal. It's the fact that they've got such a big obligation to try and fulfill, and what would then be seen as profit or maybe even their transfer budget for the year is now taken away because that was pretty much what the match day revenue is, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. Because
match day revenue in the Premier League is actually quite big.
It's big. I think at the moment, maybe a quarter. Correct me if I'm wrong. It could be around a quarter of their total revenue stream.
Really?
So I think at the moment, sponsorship would probably be one of the largest, and then comes broadcaster. Yeah. Rights, and then comes along the ticket sales and merchandise sales and whatnot.
Which it seems pretty safe for, say, these Premier League clubs or these elite Premier League clubs like the traditional top 6, and then like your clubs like your Bayern Munich, your Barcelona, your Real Madrid. Their revenue streams in terms of commercial and TV rights is very consistent, but obviously those clubs still have the biggest stadiums, and those stadiums are no longer being filled, so that sort of revenue has disappeared. You could the unfortunate thing is once you start going further down the tables, like further down the table, further down the leagues, all of a sudden these clubs are becoming heavily reliant on their match day revenue.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's where it actually starts getting like seriously dangerous, isn't it?
Terrible. Yeah, 100%. I think there was, I guess, a way to offset this just general impact on the lower tier clubs and also EFL teams generally was that so I guess there was kind of a strategy proposed by and it went ahead. It was a strategy such that the EPL, the Premier League, would, I guess, in the form of a loan, would lend £250 million over to the EFL. I think that definitely would have helped offsetting the economic consequences of those clubs. Yeah. But then again, I guess the lower tier clubs don't really have, if you look at their shareholders and their owners, they're not really as, I guess, put in broad day terms, wealthy. Yeah. As obviously, Chelsea, Man City, and those sorts. And so typically when a club faces, I guess, a cash flow crunch, when their cash flows are just not being good at all, they would turn to their shareholders and to provide short-term support. However, this is a pandemic, and in this case, even the shareholders and owners are also facing cash flow crunches, and they're not in the best position to provide their club the best support financially in terms of short-term support. And so what we are seeing now is that clubs are resorting to borrowing money to cover the short-term funding gap until the cash flow is no longer affected. Yeah. And also, so conventionally, the way it works is that whenever a club is, I guess, facing financial disarray, is they would take long-term loans and they would secure it against larger fixed-rate assets, such as stadiums. Okay. And so we saw that didn't really go down well. I mean, it's conventional, but it also is very risky because we saw in 2008, 2007-ish.
We're during the GFC.
Yeah. I think prior, around that time, there was, I think, 6 or 7 clubs that was using that strategy of, having a long-term loan secured against a large fixed-rate asset, such as stadiums. Yeah. And they all went into administration.
I think Liverpool was one of them. I think Liverpool.
I think Liverpool was definitely a victim of that. I think there was a couple EFL teams that were also impacted in that way. Yeah.
It's just a very risky, especially when we literally don't know how, like, when this pandemic, when the restrictions are going to lift. Like, this is
Yeah.
This is literally just a massive question mark for everyone right now. Like, obviously, they've got the plans in place and there's optimism where there needs to be. But at the end of the day, no one knows when this is going to get better, really. Like, until we've got a cure. Obviously, there's been news that there might be a cure, but even for that to come into worldwide like availability, that'll take like years, mate.
Yeah, it's definitely going to have a long-term massive impact economically on the clubs.
Yeah.
At the moment, but I guess generally, in terms of just cash flow management for clubs, it's always been an uphill battle for clubs. So essentially, when we're looking at cash flow for clubs, your general average Premier League club, they do face quite long periods where they do have, I guess, just negative cash flows. So we see that the main stream of cash flow revenue when it's at its peak is around July, March period, and then also in the December period. And those periods are when they receive the prize money, and also they receive, I think it's media revenue as well.
Okay.
And so those 3 periods provide, I guess, the largest revenue cash flow for those clubs.
Yeah.
And then you have the dips, which is whenever they sign a player, whenever they give increased bonuses. And so those dips are just happen in all points of the year. And so between December and March, they have negative cash flows. And I think this pandemic has definitely stressed it. And this is a worse time for, I think, just almost all clubs economically, because obviously they're facing their cash flow management is at its worst at the moment. Yeah. Almost all of them, or I wouldn't be surprised if almost all of the clubs are facing towards, borrowing money to just to support themselves short term.
Yeah.
So that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Just to put into perspective, just how much like even just match day revenue in general means to the Premier League, just because most of our listeners are from the UK or from Australia who follow the Premier League. So in the 2018-19 season, the Premier League's total revenue for the entire lot of the clubs was £5.2 billion, right?
Yeah.
It's quite a lot of money. 13% of that was just match day revenue. So 13%. Yeah. So 600, like almost £700 million of that was match day revenue. All of a sudden, when we talk about what transfer activities and stuff like that, we talk about, you see it sort of differs between like 700 to £1 billion is like how much this summer transfer window generally costs.
Yeah.
That's essentially all disappeared now. So that pretty much what we're trying to think about is what do we think will happen in the future, especially when it comes to the transfer market? Like, what approach do you think clubs will go towards? Because you can see already, not only is a player's some evaluations decreasing because there's less demand, so on and so on. Yeah. Also, clubs are recognizing that in order for us to have some sort of liquidity, what has to go is our players, because they are basically our only valuable assets besides the stadium, and no one's going to sell the stadium.
Yeah, No, I agree.
So what would you say the next approach would be for football clubs in the future or in the near future?
Well, in terms of the transfer market, I would say, well, if we're speaking right now, I would say that this would be, if there is any players out there currently that are, I guess, unsettled or are just wanting to leave the club, just move on to another club, then this is their best chance right now. Because at the moment, say a player wants to, I guess, increase their bonuses, or they just want, I guess, to change the contract, then obviously most clubs right now can't really fulfill that desire because they're facing cash flow crunches.
100%.
And so this would help the player, into looking somewhere else for another opportunities at another club that will actually fulfill that, and where they will receive, I guess, just a higher wage in general.
So would you say essentially what you're saying is, if a player at, say, a club like, let's say, Burnley, all right, we say Burnley, of course, their revenue streams are more reliant on match day revenue as to say the top six, who we know for a fact that they're a lot more stable than any other club in the UK or any of the clubs outside of England. All right. So what you're saying, if they have a star player there, let's say Dwight McNeil, so he's obviously a young talent there. If he's wanting to increase his wages when his new contract comes up, Burnley obviously can't fulfill increasing his wages because they have to spend within their means. Like they have to try and stay up in the Premier League, that sort of stuff. If he's a prized asset and say a team like Man United comes in and they can offer those increased wages, that's what you're saying is going to happen. That bigger clubs are going to prey on the talented players at other clubs.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely think that during this period, the players, I guess their bargaining end has just been strengthened. Over clubs that are just generally don't have that capacity to really fulfill just increasing wages, renewing contracts, and so obviously other clubs where they do have that opportunity to prey on the lower end players, this is their best chance to really sign players. Yeah. So in that sense, it has been a positive outlook for clubs in terms of signing players. Yeah. However, obviously for the bottom tier clubs and I guess EFL teams as well, it has been a challenge. Yeah, 100%.
I suppose it's like a domino effect. So obviously the top teams will be looking to take from the lower half teams who now all of a sudden can't fulfill the obligations of a player that wants that one. So they're going to look down on the lower leagues, on 100%. The other teams who, say for example in League One, there's star strikers who are getting 20 million. Let's say Ivan Toney, who were at Peterborough last season, was an absolutely incredible player. Unfortunately, Peterborough didn't get promoted, but Peterborough probably couldn't fulfill his desires anymore, and that's why a team like Brentford, who had sold players, they've sold Ollie Watkins for a huge profit, because at the same time they're suffering as well in terms of revenue and stuff, and they need to find some new revenue streams. Hey, we'll sell Ollie Watkins for, I think it was roughly about 20 million, I think, that they sold him for. Ivan Toney, £5 million. They can give him some more wages, which would have been a lot less than keeping Ollie Watkins and giving him an improved contract.
Exactly. It's just increased their bargaining power into leaving the club and I guess going to the top tier clubs. Yeah, yeah.
You could say it's sort of like the opposite effect for players who aren't standout players of certain clubs. So all of a sudden these players who are out of contract, their bargaining power is sort of decreases, and it goes 100%. Into the power of the clubs themselves, because it's like, hey, we can't fulfill your obligations. If you want to play, this is what we can give you. Yeah,
I guess that would obviously be a consequence of this whole thing in terms of how it impacts the transfer market for those players. It's definitely interesting. Yeah. But
it's all up in the air, isn't it?
Yeah, like, it's all up in the air, and
it can go one other way.
Uncertain at the moment.
Yeah. Uncertainty is the big word for coronavirus. Literally, all we can do is just have educated guesses, or everything can change. Like we said with Project Restart, that once that happened, it sort of settled everything, and there was a lot more confidence in what was going on. But hey, we could hit a second wave and things go back down again. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Nobody knows really, and there is still, I guess, the shareholders of the Premier League are still trying to decide what direction, what steps must be took from now on to ensure that the Premier League is still the number one game, or just for fans in general. I guess so.
Very much. Pretty much wrapped that up. All right, so let's take another look at this. So I was actually doing a bit of research in terms of in terms of how much money is actually invested at a football club in relative to their revenue. So I was having a look at the top 5 leagues in Europe. So we're looking at obviously the Premier League in England, the Bundesliga in Germany, La Liga Spain, Serie A in Italy, and Ligue 1 in France. In terms of their revenues, wages takes up a huge percentage. Like I'm actually kind of staggered about this. So in the UK, 61% of all of a club's like wage to revenue percentage, like so 61% in terms of revenue. In Spain, 62%, Germany 54%, Italy 70%, and France 73%. So we're talking
That's crazy.
It's insane, and that's not even including like the other costs as well. So that's just wages.
That's just wages. I think in terms of Premier League clubs, I think Liverpool does have also the highest wage cost as well. I think it's
really
200-300 million pounds. Surprisingly, like I would have imagined Man City or I think maybe Chelsea might take up that spot.
Yeah, it probably will now after their transfer.
Yeah, I guess wages is an interesting topic.
Yeah,
I guess just talk on in terms of the pandemic.
Yeah,
I guess if you want to talk about how I guess a proposal by the Premier League shareholders to really offset the economic consequences on the Premier League, one proposal was that Premier League players take a 30% wage reduction.
Right.
I'm sure you've heard of this as well.
Yeah.
And obviously that didn't go well with the players and didn't go well with the PFA, which is I'm not sure.
It's like players.
Professional Football Association, which is like the union for the players.
Yeah.
They just represent the players. Obviously that didn't go well with the players.
Understandably on their behalf, like.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of so I guess that's also an interesting thing to talk about, because on one hand you've got the Premier League who is like demanding and arguing for players to like take a 30% wage cut in order to help, just the Premier League in general and clubs offset the economic consequences. And then you have the PFA who's representing the players, and they're arguing that no, this is not fair. This is it's totally not fair. It's nowhere in the contract does it say, well, a typical contract doesn't allow the Premier League to reduce the wage of a player.
Yeah.
And so you've got two parties really that are just going against each other.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like a vicious cycle, really, because okay, you can understand why a player doesn't want to reduce their wages, but hey, if you don't really reduce your wages and this continues and a football club can no longer fulfill that football club can essentially go out of business, liquidate, and then there's no employers. And then your bargaining power is diminishing by the minute. All of a sudden you'll be having to play for peanuts, really.
Exactly. I mean it just raises a question of who really bears the economic consequences of this, of the Premier League. Is it going to be the players? Is it going to be the broadcasters, sponsors?
Yeah.
The Premier League itself?
The fans.
Clubs?
Yeah.
And really, it's like you were saying before, it's all up in there right now. And I guess also adding on from before about the wage cuts. So essentially that didn't really go down happening. It didn't actually end up happening that players were going to take a 30% wage cut. But what happened instead was that they donated a certain percentage of their wages towards the NHS, because it'd be more, I guess, in their view, it'd be more a better use, and it's more directly contributing to fighting the cause instead of attempting to offset like whatever economic consequences for your club.
100%. That is them directly helping out, because obviously they're putting the money there directly, as opposed to, say, if they reduce their wages, that money will stay with the owner.
Exactly. I mean, I guess the other idea was that if obviously wages are going to be reduced, then that's less taxation money going towards the treasury and hence the NHS. So if you're going to reduce wages, then that's ultimately less money that's going to be contributed towards the NHS. That was, I guess, their argument against the reduction of wages. Yeah. But yeah, it's just been a massive toll on everything under the Premier League umbrella.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm definitely keen to see like how this all plays out.
Yeah, we have no idea what's gonna happen. So if you thought we had all the answers, we don't. It's just literally spitballing ideas here. What's gonna happen? But there's so many different avenues that this could go. One thing that I was having a look at is, okay, so what does a what does a football team do now in terms of and how do they approach recruiting in general now? Because of course, what we found in the past 30 years since the Premier League's been around, almost 30 years now, we've had a look at what the wage inflation has been. So here's a game. How much is, let's say, so actual general inflation since 1992 has gone up 108%, right?
Yeah.
Which is that's normal. So that's basically double. Whatever you could buy back then is worth double now. How much do you think wage inflation has gone up since then in terms of football?
Oh my goodness, probably.
This is mad. This is crazy figures right here.
Okay, I'm gonna say something crazy. I'm gonna say. So are we saying since
1992?
1992.
Yeah.
I would say 500%.
Mate, it's not even close.
Not even close.
Not even close. Wait, 2,811% since 1992.
That's crazy.
It's staggering, and it's clearly been accelerated in the past decade or so, as these super rich owners have come into football clubs and all of a sudden can, okay, we can't offer you trophies just yet, but we can offer you money, which this club can't do. To bring success to a club short term. This isn't something that can obviously continue. Well, we don't think it can continue. You'd hope it doesn't continue, because all of a sudden clubs are getting priced out, and especially now that revenue's taking a hit, this surely means the end or a deflation in that wage hit. Like we were talking about before, clubs have to just cut costs somehow. Like wages is the biggest cost of a football club. So in terms of like what they'll be able to do there in terms of cutting costs is maybe, unfortunately, some clubs letting players on high wages go. You've seen that already. You can already see that with what Chelsea were doing. So yeah, to make room for their new signings, that was something that if you listen to our podcast from last week, the link should be below. This was a plan they had all along. They were always going to sign Kai Havertz. They were always thinking about signing Timo Werner. They just saw the opportunity to do it. But there was players who were at that club who were coming towards the end of their career, who were on extremely high wages. So players like Willian, who else as well? Michy Batshuayi, he's on loan, but he's on quite a lot of money. So they're looking to obviously shift these players out of the club to make room for the future. Obviously younger players, and of course they've got their academy players as well, who they really want to keep because they're exciting players and they cost a lot less in terms of wages as opposed to, say, like Nicolas Pepe, who cost Arsenal so much money. You know, so what would you say their approach is? Do you reckon they're going to go towards more like academies? Like, are you going to see more of what Chelsea did last season, but because they have to in terms of their costs?
It's interesting to talk about Chelsea. I remember scrolling through Instagram, and then a couple of days ago, and then I think it was maybe Frank Lampard saying that we're no longer an academy club.
Yes, I saw that.
Right after they signed like a bunch of players, he just comes out and say, "All right, we're no longer an academy club."
Yeah.
And they've got like amazing academy. They've got
probably the best in England.
I'm not entirely sure who's came from the academy. I would guess Loftus-Cheek. That would be a wild guess.
Yeah, Loftus-Cheek. A lot of players.
Ake is Arsenal. Or is he? I would assume it's...
I don't know.
Oh, no, it's Bournemouth. But that was a massive guess.
Yeah. You mean Ake? Yeah, Ake came from... Yeah, Ake came from Chelsea. Yeah. I was like, who?
All this time, I thought his name was Ake.
Ake.
A-K-E.
I love that. I mean, you can call him that, Ake. I'm sure it'll stand out. But, Nathan Ake came from Chelsea. But, so many players from last season. So you got Tammy Abraham, Callum Hudson-Odoi, Mason Mount, Reece James, who scored an absolute screamer at the weekend.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. They've got an insane talent, insane academy. But you'll find that I feel like what we'll find is football clubs need to find some more creativity in their recruiting.
Yeah.
It's gonna... I feel like, especially for clubs lower down the pecking order, they can't all of a sudden pay for these players to stay, or their star players, and they can't afford these older players coming down Unlike, say, Brighton with Adam Lallana, we're going to see less of that, I feel like, unless those players take a huge wage cut. So they're going to have to see, okay, who's young and hungry? Who can we get up? Unfortunately, teams who have looked at the long term, teams like Southampton, Burnley, who have got really good A-grade academies, I feel like we're going to see those players implementing youth academy players a lot more, infiltrating their youth. I feel like a lot of clubs are going to try and head in that direction because it's a lot more renewable.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see like how this all plays out in terms of, you know, academy players getting play time, and, you know, how this plays on different levels of the league. You know, how I'm going to see bottom tier clubs like maybe Watford, Bournemouth.
Yeah.
Is Bournemouth still in the Premier League?
Bournemouth and Watford got relegated last season.
Oh my god! Okay.
I know. I still can't believe it.
Yeah. So you see how like bottom tier, you know, clubs really play this out with the academy team.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very interested to see how Chelsea are going to go about this with their academy players.
Yeah, they're sort of an exception, aren't they? Because
especially
of what's happened, it's just happened perfectly for them.
Definitely, especially after they signed there was like 4 crazy players for like insane amounts.
Yeah. They spent over almost $250 million this window. That's pounds as well, not Australian dollars. So if you think in Australian dollars, times that by like 1.87 or something like that right now. So it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
If you want to hear more about that,
that's a lot of money.
Yeah. If you want to hear more about that with Chelsea, have a look on our previous podcast, like I mentioned before, because we go real in depth on it, on all the finances behind it and how they've been able to do that. But yeah, coming back to what's going on, especially for the lower division teams, so teams with really good youth setups, teams such as Ajax, these players, these clubs have already. They're already sustainable in that sort of sense. They're self-sustainable. They create their own talents. They don't buy their talents. These are clubs that are already set up perfectly for this situation. It's whether other clubs can follow suit, and then also as well, these clubs have to recruit smart because all of a sudden travel is restricted, so they can't really get to these hard to get places to watch these players. So do you reckon there's going to be new ways of scouting? Like,
I mean, I would say there'd be definitely a lot of more focus on homegrown players. But that's just me like saying that out of the blue. Taking into consideration the pandemic and how that's just affected travel and just general features of the Premier League. So that's one thing I'd say.
Yeah, so you're going to see a lot more like nationalism, sort of not national.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Just homegrown,
that sounds so bad. You see like a lot more national focus. So like Spain, you're going to see a lot more Spanish players. Germany, there's going to be a lot more 100%. German players. Like in terms of percentage, England probably needs it the most. It has been slowly but surely happening with the talent that we got coming through. But you're saying there's going to be a lot more English players coming through.
Definitely at an academy level, 100%.
Yeah. Less influx of players from abroad because
just generally just less signing of, you know, these international talents, more signing of homegrown talents. I think Chelsea is a great example of this. You know, Tammy Abraham, that's their academy. You know, Mount. They have all these amazing homegrown players which have like made them, I guess, in a great position in these circumstances, whereas in comparison to other clubs.
Very interesting. Well, I mean, like, I pretty much have no idea what's going to happen, and that's the beauty of it, because hey, we don't have the answers here. We're just going to have to wait and see, aren't we?
100%.
We could spitball so many ideas, but I feel like that pretty much covers a lot of things. At the end of the day, revenue is taking a hit. We don't know how long it's going to take until it gets back to normal. Fortunately, TV rights is still sticking around, and that because people can't go to the games, more people are watching TV. Hopefully, TV revenue increases, that sort of stuff. But whether it'll trickle down to those lower clubs is still a question, and how that's going to still be sustainable. Another thing, wages cover a huge amount of a club's liabilities. To a lot of clubs, that they actually sometimes run at a loss, so their percentage of wages in comparison to their revenue is actually sometimes more than 100% once you go into like the championship, things like that. that can't continue. Wage inflation, that can't continue as well. So so basically what we're expecting is sort of a reversal of what's been happening over the past decade. Hey.
Yeah. I could definitely expect that. You know, wages, inflation going decreasing. But I don't expect that in the long future. I just expect that in the short run. For short term, then I would see it.
So you expect
just go back to normal, essentially.
Yeah.
V-shaped recovery, if you will.
Yeah. Finance.
So also, in terms of rebate, I was going to say rebates. In terms of commercial broadcasting, the Premier League are still paying, I think, 36 million every week in rebates to broadcasters.
Really?
Yeah, which is it's crazy at the moment. So I think that was for last season. I'm not sure how it's going to play out this season. But yeah, they've got crazy expenses.
Yeah, man.
That have just came out of this pandemic.
Yeah.
Which is just, absurd.
I guess it's literally just, as we said multiple times, just time will tell. Time will tell. But 100%. Fingers crossed it's for the good of the sport, because it has the big elephant in the room is it's been heading in the wrong direction for quite a long time.
Yeah.
So I guess you could take a silver lining out of the coronavirus and say this is just like an opportunity to restart, which you hear that happen a lot. But yeah, pretty much that covers it, really. I mean, thank you so much for coming on, Ammaar.
It's my pleasure.
I know, yeah, mate. We're gonna have you back on. I think I said something similar to Ovi. I think that we should later down the track, do another podcast and return to what we've been talking about and see what's actually happened.
Yeah, that would be very interesting, especially on this topic as well, where like day by day things are changing,
100%,
like absurdly, and you just never know what's gonna happen tomorrow in terms of Premier League features and everything else.
100%. Yeah, we'll see how we go.
Yep.
See how we go. All right, mate. Well, great to have you on. Yeah, we'll have you on back again soon. And thank you so much again, guys, for watching that one. If you did like today's episode, hit the like button down below. And if you haven't already, subscribe to us. We're trying to obviously grow this channel to be the best it can possibly be. If you haven't as well, check out our website, soccernomics.net, so you can read all the articles from me and Ammaar as well. Ammaar is one of our journalists.
I have a good article coming out soon.
Have you?
It's the player evaluation one. It's just the one I've been working on for a while.
Brilliant. Yeah. You said that you've been working on that one for a while.
Coming out soon.
Get
excited.
Definitely coming out soon. You got it. Stay tuned, guys, because that one's going to be brilliant.
Yeah. I have a few other ideas in my mind at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, spitballing.
Cooking in the kitchen.
Exciting stuff happening, guys.
Yeah.
Easy.
Definitely keen where this will head.
Easy. And shall I put your details in below if people want to?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? If they have any questions about...
Yeah, if you have any questions about finance in general, or just want to get in touch with me, want to talk more about this topic with me, feel free to contact me through, I guess, LinkedIn or... Yeah, LinkedIn will work.
Easy, perfect. Yep. Sounds good. I'll put all the links down below, guys. All right.
All right.
But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you next week.
All right, cheers.